Welcome to the Good News Mama podcast, a place to get in touch with other mamas, share the load, and know the Lord. Here we aim to lift each other up in the good news of Jesus and the laughter that comes with motherhood. We are a community of mamas just trying to keep the main thing the main thing. I'm your host, Lynn Carter, and each time you tune in, I pray you are encouraged and that you leave challenged and breathe a sigh of relief that you are understood. We were not meant to do life alone, Mama. Thanks for joining in. Let's do this and let's share the good news. Mama, oh mama, I am glad you are here. In this episode of the Good News Mama podcast, I am super excited to bring on Zick of Moral Revolution. This is an episode that is intended for mama's ears only. So put in the earbuds if you're with your kids, not something I would be playing in the car on a family trip. We're definitely talking about sexuality and morality and purity and when to have the talk with kids, and not necessarily just teens, but with kids because, hello, they're exposed to crazy things even before we realize it. And straight from their website, Moral Revolution has developed resources that help initiate and shape conversations about morality and sexuality. Their goal is helping people to initiate these discussions, to alleviate the shame that's often attached to sexuality, and to equip people to have informed, open, and honest dialogues that ultimately lead to healing and wholeness. That's exactly what this conversation is. It is an open and honest dialogue with Caitlin about what she has found in her line of work and really what our world and our children are facing. So I'm so excited to bring you this real and raw episode with Zick of Moral Revolution. Hope you love it. Hey, Caitlin, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Listen, ever since I heard you and Jaime McLaughlin talking on her podcast, I'm like, I got to get this girl on because you guys were fire. In fact, I'm going to reference her episode a lot because there was so much that you guys unpacked and it was a short time. And I don't want to cover a lot of the same stuff, just a few things that were important. But I want to go into a little bit of stuff that you guys didn't get a chance to for time's sake. And I know we're on a time crunch, so shut me up if if I get derailed. Why don't you just give a brief background of who you are, your mission, your passion, all that stuff.
Yeah. So my name's Zick, and we live in Redding, California. We're a part of Bethel Church, but we run a nonprofit called Moral Revolution, which exists to tell the world a better story about sex. We know that historically the church has either been silent on the topic or sometimes shamed it. And we know the world has perverted it, but we believe the kingdom of God celebrates it. And so we want to celebrate sex. We want to impact and empower and equip everybody from teenagers to young marrieds or dating and relationships, young marrieds, parents, of how to have the conversation, healthy marriages, just making sure sex is good inside of the covenant of marriage. So we really talk about sex from all aspects. My husband and I co-direct together, which is super fun. We've been passionate about this topic. When we were 19 years old, dating across the country from Florida to California, talking on our flip phones late at night, we would dream about running a ministry like this one day. So we can't believe we get to do this. It's so powerful. We took over the organization almost 4 years ago, but Moral Revolution's been in existence for, I think, 11 years now. So just glad to be a part. We have a great team all over the world, volunteers. We're in multiple languages and just really doing our best to impact the world and tell a better story about sex.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of that, I did want to give people a warning. Put your earbuds in if you're listening to this, because I don't know if you want your kids to hear it firsthand, and you can decide what you want to share with your kids later. But with that being said, and you mentioned multiple languages, I was looking up on the website topics about porn because I did see a quick video maybe about a month ago. I watched some stuff on the website and it was mind-blowing. And of course, it linked to a blog and I couldn't find it again. But I did want to talk about pornography, healthy sex and marriage, how to talk to your kids about the talk, because it's so taboo. Nobody feels comfortable talking about this stuff. But this is the stuff that I guarantee when people are flipping through the podcast list and they see something about sex and porn, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I want to hear that. Because that's the only chance you get to hear it, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I'm excited for the next few minutes we get to spend together. Let's just start with kind of the basics. I know you're a mom of 4.
Yep.
And the ages range from about maybe 4 to 11-ish, somewhere in there. Still, okay. And I bring that up because you have a lot of experience talking to your kids about sex, and you don't have a teenager yet, but you soon will. And I know that some mamas listening to this already have a teen. And I just kind of wanted you to share some of your go-to resources, how you bring up that conversation, because obviously we want our kids to come to us and not everybody else about sex. And we want them to have a healthy relationship with sex. So before you go into kind of how you do that, I wanted just to briefly touch on the fact that when you and I were raised, I'm 37, almost 38. And when I was brought up, it was like a purity culture was definitely pushed in your face, like sex is bad, it's wrong, don't do this before marriage, and it completely, I felt like, missed the boat as far as where our hearts should be, like not seeing how close to the line we could get, because the whole entire time you're building soul ties. You're like creating connections there that you don't realize. Just because the penis isn't in the vagina doesn't mean that there's not like things happening that are very difficult to undo. So with that being said, I kind of wanted to talk to you about how you feel the purity culture is different with moral revolution versus, now, and how churches can relate differently to this, knowing now what we do. So start by that first, and then we'll go into the tips that you have.
Yeah, I mean, some of the first things I always think of is sex isn't no, but that is how many people raised in church work. When they hear sex, they think they have to whisper it. It's a bad word. Yes. Sex and sin are not synonymous.
Right.
Say
it again. Say it again for people in the back.
And sin are not synonymous. Sex is actually a gift from God. So it's not supposed to be attached to shame. But so often for us, our first exposures, experiences, we're so entangled with sin and with shame that when anybody thinks about sex, that's what they think of. So we have to create a healthy vision for why God gave us sex and how good it is. So even just literally yesterday in the car, my son spells like sex, because he's like thinking of the littler ones, right? He's like, yeah, I don't really want to talk about sex. And he's like, that's gross. And my husband's like, sex isn't gross. Sex is good. Because they're little, they don't want to think about sex, but we're just trying to make sure that I'll give more background of why we were even having that conversation later, but making sure that their paradigm is that it's gross. We're like, you think it's gross now. One day when you're married, you're going to love it. It's really good. It's a gift from God to make you closer to your husband or wife. Yeah. So just making sure that sex isn't a bad word. It's not no. It's actually a big yes. Like God said yes to sex. His only no's were protective no's and covenant, which is that's what healthy no's are. It's boundaries to protect us from something that is powerful, that has the ability to harm us when used out of the way he designed it. So he knows this is the way it's meant to be, so that we weren't meant to bond and break and bond and break. We were meant to bond once and you're never supposed to forget your first love. It's like, because your first love was supposed to be the only, so there's so much behind that. But I'll go back to my sons with the whole bad word thing, because I think this is a really funny story. So all the moms, hopefully some of you are already feeling tense because you're like, we're talking about sex. So here we go. One of my sons is very strong-willed, outgoing, always likes to ruffle feathers. And he found out the bad words from my husband. Long story that we probably don't have time to go into. But we've just basically said to our sons, we do have a daughter, but she's 5. So we haven't had all these conversations yet. So we've told our sons, like, we are the person you can find out anything from. Like, many kids are turning to Google or their friends to figure things out. It's like, no, you can ask us any question. We'll tell you the truth. We'll always tell you the truth. And so one of our sons asked what the bad words were. And so my husband gave a good talk of like, hey, I will tell you what they are. You've never heard mom and dad say these things. You don't hear your aunts and uncles. Like, these aren't words we say, but I will tell you what they are. So similar scenario where then my, I think 5 or 6-year-old at the time said the F word at school. It was not great. So we had lots of conversations out of that. But more important to us, if our kids cuss or not, is that they know mom and dad are safe and that we'll always tell the truth, and we're the people to come to with their questions, their curiosity, not their friends. Like, we will tell them the truth. So in similar fashion, he was saying the word sex over and over when he was 5 years old in front of his 7-year-old brother, trying to ruffle his feathers and irritate him. Mm-hmm. So he just was walking around the living room saying sex, 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 sex. And I'm like, what is he doing right now? And so my 7-year-old says to him, He's like, Connor, he's like, sex isn't a bad word. And I'm like, yes. He's like, it's a good thing that God gave us, but some people just used it and made it bad. And I'm like, that is the truth.
You're like
right there.
parenting win. Like,
yes, major parenting win. I'm like, yes, you know,
which is so funny because side note, cuss words, Ben has always been like against like societal norms and stuff where he's like, who says you have to have a diamond ring? Like, who made that rule? And he's like, who says certain words are cuss words? Like, who decided that? You know, he's very like thinking outside the box and stuff. And so when you said that, I could just hear Ben saying like, who said that was a cuss word? Like, who decided?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, he's like, what's the big deal?
Exactly. Same thing. So no, very true. And like what you mentioned, like saying sex and saying like basic anatomical parts that make some of us just kind of shrink back. Like, oh my gosh, did you just say penis? Did you just say vagina? Like in our house, we use those words. Now I have 3 boys and they're 2, 4, and 6. So we say penis a lot. So for me, and I'm in the healthcare field, so I'm used to talking about body parts in the anatomy, but I've definitely gotten more comfortable with it over the past 6 years. And part of that is because I just want them to know what they're talking about and why it's important not to make up nicknames all the time for things, because I want them to be able to tell me if something happens, like this is somebody, you know, asked to see this or touch this or whatever. I want them to come to me and tell me, you know, what they know. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, it's funny what kids will do to try to get a rise.
It is hilarious. Yeah. So saying the body parts is huge. And really, I know like kind of the question you were getting at the beginning was when to start having the conversation. Honestly, most of us are going to think it's too early, and it's probably impossible for it to be too early because the sex conversations is exactly what you're saying. It's starting with our body and making sure there isn't shame, because it isn't nicknaming things or like acting squeamish around it. It's like, no, this is the part God gave you. And so my favorite resource on when to start, because I think a lot of times parents, well, first of all, moms, dads, they're overwhelmed in general, right? They're just like overwhelmed. They're like, that's the last thing I'm thinking of when I have a 2, 4, and 6-year-old, because I'm still in diapers and car seats and trying to get them to eat a carrot. You know, you're like, I'm not thinking about sex and penises yet. You're like, but I should be. What? You know? So, and you're like, and then what's appropriate? Because most of us didn't have it modeled to us in an appropriate way. Like we found out in inappropriate ways too late, or from something really terrible, like some sexual abuse happening as a child. So there's so many reasons why I understand and empathize with parents where they're like, this is scary. I'm going to avoid it. Like, I'm good at avoiding things. I know how to avoid. But that's why I love this resource. It's called the God's Design for Sex series. And it's literally a series of books that starts at age 3. And it's age appropriate. It's children's books. It's what you have on their bookshelf in their room. Get the whole series and put the age appropriate ones on the right shelves in the right bedrooms, and pull them out to read them just like a normal book. So it doesn't have to be, we're sitting down to talk about sex or penises today and vaginas. We're just sitting down to read this storybook about how God designed our bodies. And so normalizing it, like you said, from a very young age, instead of like your, you know, whatever nicknames, hoo-haws. And again, no shaming for parents who are listening. They're like, oh, we do. I call it a nay-nay, you know, like whatever. There's no shame. But we do encourage you to get these resources, because if you're calling it a nay-nay, you're probably a little uncomfortable with saying vagina.
Right.
But get these resources and just read them. Read them first to yourself. Read them with your children. And you'll see, you're like, wow, this was so easy. So I just like resources for parents who are typically overwhelmed already, to say, take the guesswork out, buy the book, and it gives you the language. It gives the conversation. It shows your kids that you're the safe person and the right person to talk to. You have the power of first mention. So I love these books. This whole series is amazing.
No, that is so good. And I did have a question about those resources. And like I said, the Unfiltered Motherhood podcast has a bunch more about Caitlin and resources and things that they talk about there. So going on into maybe some things that were not really talked about in the other episodes you did. Big one that I want to hit before we have to go is pornography. So that is something I feel like is so under talked about, but over like, and it's a big issue. It's so powerful. And it has, in that video that I found, that I hope I can find it and link, but it basically was like a 2 or 3 minute video from a blog that showed like how many people worldwide are impacted by pornography, and how it's not just, it's not hurting anyone. Like that's not the case really. And all the different things and problems that it creates. So I thought about when we're going to talk about this, one, like safeguarding our kids. Okay. Yep. And then 2, like obviously as a wife in marriage, like how to talk to her husband about this, because there could be women listening that say, I know that my husband has issues with this, but we haven't talked about it. And I feel like I'm scared to talk about it. And I don't really know of any other resources where women are encouraged to talk to their husbands about it in a free way. Like, how can you have a conversation like that without coming off as judgy or condemning, So can you share just anything that you have insights into pornography, first talking about like what the danger is behind it, and then going to children, and then going to marriage?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So we'll start with, I'm sorry, it was children and then marriage. What was the first one? Oh, just the dangers.
Just kind of, just like the danger of it.
Yeah. So I have some statistics that I can definitely share. One resource, like you mentioned, there's so many, there really are good resources, but I don't think most people know about them. So I'll say them pretty quickly. You can link them in the notes. But Fight the New Drug is amazing. Follow it on Instagram. Go to their website. They're actually even going to show you how to talk to your kid about pornography. And it says if they've heard it or if they've seen it yet or if they've not, like it takes you on a map journey of clicking. Like, oh, if they've seen it, here's where to start. If they haven't yet, here's where to start. So they're great. They are non-religious, non-political. They even go into schools, but I love their mission because they're all about like everybody needs to hear the dangers of pornography. They have a documentary, which is a must-see by everybody in the world, and it's free. I think they just ask for a donation, but it's called Brain Heart World. And it's a documentary, and it goes into the impact on the brain, because what happens to the brain on porn is crazy. It almost sounds hopeless to be like, it's unchangeable. It's changeable, but with really intentional work. Yeah. So one of the things that I could, like, I don't have all the scientific statistics to just spout off for you, but if you watch that, you'll see it. And then here's the thing is, we do know, I mean, we have promise in the word that, we can be transformed by the power of the renewing of our mind. And now we know because of neuroscience that that's true. Like we literally can change our minds by going in and starving the lies and feeding it with truth. But when it's visual and it's the porn, like there's so much connected that you have to go in and do so much work to heal and to understand addiction. Because a lot of times it's hard to empathize with like a 35-year-old husband who can't stop looking when you're like, he loves his wife, he loves his kids, he doesn't understand. Because a lot of it was, he was probably an 8-year-old who was exposed, who became addicted. Like his whole brain is wired on this. And so understanding and having empathy and then knowing like it is truly an addiction. It's not something that somebody can just like go cold turkey and stop necessarily outside of a miracle of God. Yeah. So understanding, oh, this is going to take work. This is a big deal. This is really damaging the brain. There's so much behind it there. So you learn from that documentary, you learn what happens in the brain, what happens in the heart, and then how it's impacting the world, from everything from trafficking to just the impact it's having on marriages. The statistics and everything are in that documentary. So it's a really good place if you're like, oh, wow. You could even just say to your husband, why don't we watch this documentary together so we understand the world our kids are growing up in. Right.
Good tip. And one thing I did want to mention when you said like the impact it has on the world and like husbands and wives, I had a friend tell me one time because I've heard part of your testimony talking with Jaime about your wedding night and about your history and your husband's history. And please go listen to that episode, Unfiltered Motherhood podcast, because there's so much more that Caitlin and I won't get to say in the next 30 minutes. But I had a friend tell me like right after I got married, and of course we were having problems like connecting and like thinking, like flipping the switch that it's not okay to have sex before marriage, but it is okay after. And I had a friend tell me, well, you should just watch porn together with your husband. Like, you should that will help you both. And we never did, but I just thought like, how is that watching somebody else have that like going to help me connect with my husband? And it doesn't. It actually is more damaging. And and that video that I was talking about, that was only 2 or 3 minutes, was talking about just how it impacted marriages, lives, families, like depending on whether the man or the woman was consuming the porn, and just, it basically leaves you unable to connect, and just, it's so isolating too. So when you said that, like watching the documentary together, I thought, oh my gosh, I remember getting advice that I should watch porn with my husband to help our relationship in the beginning. So yeah, but go ahead. You're going to talk about more in children and marriage and stuff. So
yes. Yeah. So telling your children about porn, again, I'm like the resource queen. So there's so many resources, but here's where to start. And here's the thing too, if you go to my Instagram, I have highlight, like the little highlight bubbles at the top. I have that on talking to your kids about sex. And then I have one called porn prevention, but they can also feel free to DM me and ask me any other questions that I'm not getting to. So if you go to both of those highlights have these resources on it, but it's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. They have the junior edition and the older kids edition, and it's called Porn Proofing Today's Kids. So this is how it teaches your kids to understand, to recognize and reject pornography. A lot of you might think, what? They're too young, but it starts really simple. And this is so beautiful of a storybook. It's like on television, computers, and screens, good pictures show, and it shows good pictures, and then it shows bad pictures. So, I mean, the power of this is, and I love this. I walked in on my kids doing this the other day where a bad commercial came on, and I heard my 6-year-old tell my 5-year-old, cover your eyes, and they both pulled the blanket over their head because it was just like an inappropriate commercial. Yeah. And I'm like, that is the power. We have to equip and empower our kids to where we always do that. So if we're watching, normally the only thing with commercials we might watch is like a sports game or something, right?
Right.
So watching a sports game and something inappropriate comes on, you don't just like not say anything and hope they don't really get it. You're like, that's inappropriate. That's not okay. That's bad. Close your eyes, turn away. Or movie previews. Sometimes I'm like, I'm at a kid's movie. Why is this a preview? We leave the theater till the previews are done because we're like, this is inappropriate. Right. Whether it's fear-based, sex-based, you're like, whatever it is. I'm like, I always say, like, you call it out and say what it is so that they don't just get desensitized to it, which is really what has happened to many of us who are listening. I mean,
well, yeah. And like national television, the Grammys and Cardi B, like what? How is that even being televised? It's very sad. So yeah, very good point. And like, how young does that book suggest for the junior one?
So the junior one, I always do not. We just did a podcast with the author of this book. Also, when you were mentioning listen to Unfiltered podcast, if they go to the Moral Revolution podcast, we have all of this. We have we have like science and sex. So we talk about the brain on sex and on porn. We tell my whole story on there. We talk about we have loads and loads of episodes on the Let's Talk About It podcast. I believe this would be ages like 3 to 6 or 3 to 7, and then the next one would be like 7 to 11 or 7 to 12.
Yeah. And especially now when we're doing virtual learning and stuff can pop up that you're not expecting. And like, you don't want your kids to be caught off guard and to know. So that's really cool. I actually did get that book. We haven't gone through it together with my kids, but part of it's because I just didn't really feel equipped to answer questions and like how early is too early and, things like that. But listen, some of your advice. The junior version
would totally be appropriate. And honestly, that's what's great about this. So this is Protect Young Minds on Instagram. You can find them. Like, they're just saying, like, what does private mean? These are meant to, be kept private. And it gives you all of the language. Like, it teaches them to turn away from a bad picture. Turn your head and cover your eyes with your hands. Turn, run, tell. So, like, it's just giving them little kid language for when they come across something. Because like you said, a pop-up on virtual learning. I mean, there's stuff you go to Peppa Pig on YouTube and it'll get a bad advertisement. Or my friend's kid was playing like a silly game where it's like, you jump things. Like, it's like a very innocent game and a naked person pops up. I mean, like, there's people after kids. And so it's anywhere. If your kid ever gets a device, you should be having these conversations. But what's awesome is they also created, for any of the moms listening that have like a 3rd to 5th grader, this same organization, Protect Young Minds, created something called Brain Defense that I have been advocating for so loudly once I learned about it, because it's an online video series that you can watch with your kids and talk to them about it. And what they did is, instead of having like an adult teach them something, they created the Brain Gang, and it's this group of like 12-year-olds. So, they've done the studies and the science behind, they're going to learn from a kid who's a few years older. They're going to listen to them, and they teach them about their brain. They even teach them just to not be addicted to screens. So it's not like they're going to talk about porn. They're teaching them how their brain works and what happens when they see bad images, and then how to know you're watching too much screens or too addicted to screens. But then it does teach them what to do if they ever recognize and how to reject pornography. And so you can buy it for your home, but they've also created it for school settings. So homeschools or public schools, private schools, it's amazing. Yeah. And you can find that on my highlight bubble and swipe up there too. It's like $99 to buy for your home, which is so worth it. You can keep it forever, go through it with all your kids, when they're at the right age. And then the school one is also amazing. And they have faith-based supplements you can add, but they've kept faith out of it so that you could do it in a public school setting. So I met with my school principal, and they actually just emailed 2 days ago that they said yes. Their school board said yes, and they're going to have all of our 3rd to 5th graders go through it. Gosh. And from now on, they'll have 3rd grades go through it every single year. So I'm like, the amount of lives, because here's the thing, we do deal with sex every day, and the stories we hear, and so we'll turn into kind of go into marriages. the amount of marriages that are impacted by sex, that's one of the statistics actually I have here. Why don't I pull this up? These statistics are from the Conquer series, which is actually like an organization that helps people get out of porn addiction. But they say 47% of families in the United States reported that pornography is a problem in their home. Pornography use increases the marital infidelity rate by more than 300%. And then we know that even more recent than this, the ages of first exposure to porn for children is 8 to 10.
Wow.
And 94% of children will see porn by the age of 14. 56% of American divorces involve one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. 70% of Christian youth pastors report that they've had at least one teen come to them for help in dealing with pornography in the last 12 months. 68% of church-going men and over 50% of pastors view porn on a regular basis.
Gosh, that's insane.
Yeah, the statistics just go further and further. 57% of pastors say porn addiction is the most damaging issue in their congregation. But then here's the staggering, really sad truth in reality is that only 7% of pastors say their church has a program to help people struggling.
Well, and that's just it. Nobody feels comfortable talking about it, especially somebody that might be struggling with it themselves that's a leader in the church, because how taboo is that? Like, that's the unspoken sin that nobody wants to talk about. Gosh, and like, of all those statistics that you read, the highest number that I caught that made me gave me chills was the 90% of kids before the age of 14 will have some exposure to porn. That is insane. That is absurd. Yep. And just to think like that was not the generation that I grew up in at all. At all. And I know technology, I had a patient the other day, they were trying to figure something out with the tech. And I'm like, they said, oh, I was born in the wrong generation. I said, no, I was born in the wrong generation. Like, I wish we didn't have to deal with all this sometimes because it's just like a Pandora's box. You do not know what you're opening up when you just turn on a screen. I mean, Peppa Pig, hello, YouTube. You think you're putting your kids in front of something educational, teach a life lesson, have some entertainment. And then you hear out the corner of your ear, basically like, whoa, what is that? And so it goes to show, like, if you're not the first person to step up to the plate and have these tough conversations, you're leaving it at the hands of the world and their friends and Google. And that is terrifying.
Yeah. Yep. Our kids are at a Christian school, and my 5th grade son said, Mom, I can't believe I'm the only boy in my grade who hasn't seen pornography.
Oh my gosh. Wow. And 5th grade is what, like 10, 9 or 10? 10. Gosh. And they're at a Christian school too, where you would think that everything is just hunky-dory, right? Because it's a Christian school and gosh.
And parents feel nervous about bringing in the brain defense. I'm like, they don't understand. And that's so with marriages and with grown adults, so many of the stories that you're like, you hear and you're like, oh, their marriage fell apart, or he was unfaithful, or she was unfaithful. Porn is at the root of, I mean, personally, I can only speak out of my personal understanding and experiences is like all of them. So obviously, statistically, that's probably not the case, but most, I mean, we have a great podcast. So also, if you are like listening and you're like, yeah, I know my husband struggled with it. It comes up every year or so, or it comes up every 6 months or so, or I find it sometimes and you're like, I feel so hopeless.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. We have an amazing podcast with our friends called, if you look up our podcast, you'll see it right away. It says something about overcoming porn and affairs.
Yeah.
It's with Debbie and Gabriel Mays, and they share their story. And he was a pastor. He was a worship leader. He would go look at porn in the bathroom before he led worship. I mean,
wow.
He was unfaithful to his wife. He cheated on her. Porn was a problem for years and years and years. And he shares his story and then even his steps on how to get free. And she shares her perspective of recovery and forgiveness and what she did to set boundaries for them to get healing and to get to a healthy place. But their marriage is better than ever. He's been free from porn he literally would say sober from porn because he's like, it was my medicine. It was my pill. And you find out that he was shown it as a 5-year-old boy by an older boy who showed him and said, don't tell anybody. And so as a 5-year-old, he's thinking, oh, that's what you do. So then he started showing other boys and saying, don't tell anybody. I mean, that is the story for many. And that's our generation when it was a VHS tape that they would hide. Yeah. Now with kids having their own little iPads and their own little phones they're playing on, parents, we don't understand and we have to guard them. It's our job to equip and empower them. But then for marriages is just having the conversation and understanding, having empathy and then knowing how to get help, going to counseling, really understanding if it's an addiction, then you need a professional to help.
Yeah.
And there's lots of great resources for that. And we share that in that podcast. So if you need more of that, if you're like, oh, I'm sure you're listening crying, or if that's your story. So if that's your story and you're caught in that pain, like I know so many terrible stories when we go travel and speak, women will come to me and say like, my husband can only do anal sex because that's all he can handle. Like he's been overdone with pornography, you're just like, it's heartbreaking. And these are young marriages that you're like, oh, wow. So it's very painful. That's why sex and sin are not synonymous. Sex and shame are not. Right. But for many of us, they are, because that's been our experience, has been brokenness. But definitely that's a huge part of my story, our story, my friend's story that we love sharing, is God really is capable of restoring and redeeming anything, any pain, any brokenness. He can do a miracle. But a lot of times that miracle happens with us walking it out and really doing the hard work of going to counseling and making it happen.
That's such great advice. And I'm sure that is just cutting to the hearts of so many mamas hearing this, because who do you talk to about something like this? I mean, a pastor, a counselor, it's not just you going through it. I mean, it's almost like you feel shame in admitting your spouse has this problem too. And then just for mamas listening, like, it is not your fault. Like you has very little to do with you at all. It's more likely the inadequacy your spouse feels in the relationship that he's in, that he is trying to substitute something that has basically been built up in his mind that is not real. Like the fantasy world and the outrageous like realm that this exists in, like, it's demonic. It is not something to be taken lightly. And that's just where I just want mamas hearing this to know, like, if you're experiencing this right now, reach out for help. Like, reach out to Moral Revolution, to Caitlin, to me, and I'll try to find the right help for you too. But you don't have to keep going that same path. Like you just mentioned the testimonies where, spouses can only get an erection under certain circumstances because they are so desensitized, because they have been on this drug for so long. And you're not alone if you're hearing this, because it is a worldwide, it has been a pandemic before coronavirus. Okay. And it's been silently ruining lives forever. So that is just so important. I'm so glad you shared those resources. And I've written down some notes as we've been going, so I can link some things in the show notes. Getting back, I mean, did you have anything else that you wanted to share about pornography? Because I did not want to cut you off on that.
Yeah, no, I think just there, like I said, there's so many resources, because it would take hours, to go into all of it. So go to Fight the New Drug, watch the documentary. That'll give you so much understanding. Because here's the thing, if it's not your marriage, if it's not your child, it's others around you. That's what I always think. So here's another advice to moms about pornography. I talk to all the moms about it. Baseball moms, school moms. I barely know you yet, but we're going to talk about it, because your son's going to play with my son. And I want you to know what's going to happen one day to our sons if we don't talk about them. So I figure out ways to bring it up nonchalantly. We were hosting the team baseball party at our house once, and I literally brought my books out. Some of them are Christian, some aren't. So I'm like, I left the faith, or actually, I think I showed them, like, these ones are faith-based, but I was like, these ones aren't. And these ones are amazing tools. You should get them. And I talked about good pictures, bad pictures. And literally the moms opened up. One was like, my son had it on his iPad. He was traumatized. We had to go to get it taken care of at Verizon because we didn't even know what to do. Because some of us moms are like, what? How do they find it? I don't even know. Right. So I'm like, I just have the conversations everywhere, because I'm like, it's that whole, like, we belong to each other. Like, there's other children. Yes. There's not bad kids. It's not like, oh, that kid's showing my kid porn. He's so bad. It's like, what happened to him? Like, how did he find it? So understanding you're helping out other moms by being the brave and courageous one to have the conversation. The brokenness, the sin, the shame, it's not going to stop unless we stop being silent. Like, the silence has to stop so that the shame can stop. That's where shame thrives, is in the silence. So for your moms who are struggling for your kids' sake, or even for your husband, you're like, there's so much shame involved. We have to break the silence. We have to find somebody that we can trust, that can walk through it with you, and really just know it's going to be okay, but I can't avoid it. I can't hide it. So I love talking to other moms about it and just getting as much knowledge as you can by going into these resources on it.
Yes. That is so good. In fact, what you just said about breaking the silence, like when I told my husband that I was going to have you on the podcast and like what you do and the mission that Moral Revolution has and just how amazing that was, and talking about that little video that I saw, it brought up a conversation for us to be able to talk and go through like when he was exposed to porn. It's not really a if, it's a when for a lot of people. When, like what age? It's not like, which is very sad, but that's just the truth. And when you realize that things are the way they are, that's when you can start changing it. But like you said, if everybody just keeps shoving it under the rug, like it doesn't exist and it's not affecting your kid because they're not old enough for it to affect your kid, that's when lots of stuff starts, like these strongholds in our lives that we don't really know how to break free. And we don't have time to go into all the ones that you guys mentioned on Unfiltered Motherhood podcast. But I love that we have your podcast. Let's talk about it as a resource. And just thinking about teens, because I do have some moms that have come to me and asked, like, how do I have this talk with my teens? So they're past like the ha 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 stage of body parts and making fun and stuff like that. And they're like getting into hard conversations, and maybe they don't have the relationship and the connection. I always felt like in my house, there was a whole lot of love and a whole lot of connection, but like talking about the hard things was just, you could ask, you knew you had that support, but we just didn't have those. We didn't normalize those types of conversations. I'll put it that way. It wasn't like, let's talk about this at the dinner table. So for moms of teens, and I don't know if it's different for girls versus boys, maybe you can give some insight, but how do they do that now? Like, do they just get a resource and start diving in? What would you say is probably the easiest way for them when they're insecure, they don't know what to do?
Yeah, I think you do have to, okay, moms, there's so, I'm like, oh, my heart breaks knowing that there's that potential like insecure and inadequacy. It's like, wait. The Lord gave you these children. Like he will enable you, equip and empower you, give you the words. And if that means that you have to go and do your own healing, then do it. Because a lot of times it's our own shame, our own issues that causes us to think I'm not equipped to talk about this. So then run after your own healing so that you can go into it healed. And if you're in the middle of it, but your kid's also in the middle of it, then obviously you can't wait till you've arrived at the healing point. So it's just so important to do exactly what you said. If we have to normalize the conversation. And even like you mentioned earlier, the Grammys, right? I mean, what Cardi B did on live television is awful, but that is the number one song in our country. Like that's playing on the radio. If you have a teenager, your child knows the lyrics. I still haven't listened to the song, but I went and looked up the lyrics. It's outrageous. You're like, how is this even allowed to be in print, let alone sung on the radio? And my kid probably knows all of it. Wow. It's very confusing time for teenagers to live in. You have to, like for me, I remember all of the lyrics for my song. I wasn't raised a Christian, so I was raised with keep it on the down low. I don't know how explicit I can be. I mean, the songs that I was raised on were so explicit, like they were so disgusting. But I would say is they were under the radar songs, right? So it was like this like sneaky bad thing that we were doing. But I'm like, it's widely accepted and normalized now. So if that's widely accepted to talk about WAP, then it needs to be widely accepted and normalized for you to talk about sexuality with your teenagers. Like they are growing up, like you have to have the conversations. You can't just be like, oh, that's so uncomfortable. Like you have to. Yeah. I'm trying to think of the best resources to start with. We have great resources at Moral Revolution. We have a 40-day journey to purity that you could do with your teenager. And when I say teenager, I'm like, you could start at 12, 13, 14 with this for sure. Yeah. It's 40 days. It's a really interactive journal type thing they go through. You could do it kind of with them, or you could let them do it if they don't want to and say, we can talk about it, whenever you want. It has YouTube videos paired with it. We have a really great book written by my friend Havla Cunnington called The Naked Truth About Sexuality. That would be a great book for you to read. Get the language, understand some stuff to feel more equipped. Because sometimes you're like, I don't know where to start. Right. Read that book, feel equipped, and then maybe decide, my 15-year-old would definitely read this, and just be able to start the conversation. We have DVDs and like video series. We have a whole series called Parenting Sexuality. So we do have a ton of resources to equip you and help you feel ready to have the conversation. But definitely all I can say is you have to have it. Like it's never too early. It's probably too late. But the Lord can redeem things. You can make up for lost time by starting now and having the conversation. Because what's happening with kids on social media, with on TV. Netflix, you guys, there's pornography everywhere on Netflix. If you don't know that yet, let me tell you, please. I watched the show. We were youth pastors before we did this. So we were youth pastors for many, many years before we led Moral Revolution. So I understand youth culture very well. I used to make sure to watch the shows that would come up on Netflix because I'm like, all of our teenagers are watching them.
Yeah.
So if I can't stomach an episode, but I know that they're talking about going to watch it every Wednesday night after youth group, then I need to know what that is. Yeah. So there's a show called Sex Education on Netflix that would always pop up with ads. I watched the first episode and saw extreme pornography. I saw a naked penis, a naked butt, an insane sex scene with naked breasts on Netflix, and it's geared towards high schoolers. It's a high school show. So I'm like, this is, if your kids are watching that, and 13 Reasons Why I'm even dating myself because these are older now, but I'm like, these were the show, we canceled Netflix now. So I'm like, I can't do that. But when I was doing that and watching them, I'm like, parents have to know, like, this is what your kids are stumbling upon. There's no filter. There was an innocent show I was watching that then started showing gay sex all of a sudden. I'm like, what in the world? So you have to know that this is everywhere. It's in your kids' faces. You have to be having the conversations. You can do it. And find other moms, find other families to support you. Get your own mentor that's like, pray for me through this, help me through this. Because we just can't have our own excuses of our own pain or shame to keep us silent for our kids' sake. Our kids need our voices on it.
Yes. And I know we're getting short on time, but I want to circle back to the fact that in the very beginning, when we were talking about how God designed sex and that sex is good, but within the covenant, right? And so I feel like if mamas listening to this are like kicking yourself because you felt so uncomfortable for so long talking about this, but even if it's already past the point where your kid already knows about sex, but you haven't talked to them about God's design for sex, and you haven't really, like, I've had some people say, well, where in the Bible does it say you cannot have sex before marriage? Okay, there is tons in the Bible about immorality and sexual purity and keeping the marriage bed holy and things like that. But just from here on, you want your kid to know, like, yes, these things exist, and in the right context, they are good, but you want to give them the information, and you want to, like, hopefully create inside of them the intrinsic motivation to turn away, because at that age, you're like, not cover your eyes, you want them to have that repulsion from sin. You want them to be disgusted with it, like God's disgusted with it, because you want them to know how beautiful it is inside of marriage and what God really intended for it to be. So all the perversion of the world that has turned into publicity and social media and all the things constantly thrown in their face, like, they are living a subpar ideal of sexuality in that regard, because they think that's what it is. They think that's all that it is. They don't know the connection. They don't know the relationship when you have your husband or your spouse and God in marriage, like, what that can look like. And so I just want to say, like, everything that you're saying, like, yes, get the resources, feel comfortable. And if that's where you are, don't forget to remind them, like, what it really was created for and what it was about, because maybe people listening are like, well, we haven't been in church. Myself and my family haven't been in church for a year for the pandemic. Like, we have not sat inside the congregation, and that's different states have different rules and childcare issues and stuff like that. But it's at the same time, you're just like, don't think that church is even going to give them the answer to this anyway. Like, you as a parent have to do this. Don't expect, like you just mentioned, that 7% of churches have resources for this, but like over 50% know their congregation struggles with it. So I don't know, just take this as a kick in the pants in a good way, Mama. If you're listening to this, that you can do this, we're here to tell you it's possible. I'm getting started on this journey, and I'm excited that I have a chance to put it in the right light for my kids. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to be equipped to answer every question. I might have to reach to other people and other resources. So I don't know. I just wanted to give that hope too, and just echo, like, yes, exactly what you're saying.
That's so good. Yeah, we want to give our kids and our teenagers a healthy vision for sex. So for us, we've been really passionate about making sure, not only when we speak and say it publicly to young people, but in our home, that our kids know that we have a great life. Like, so even today's Instagram post on Moral Revolution, which I don't write them, but I'll brag about it. They're amazing. And it says, show affection towards your spouse in front of your kids today. Because the truth is, your marriage is teaching your children how to feel toward marriage. Right. Yeah. So it's like not being weird. Like, my husband will hug me, kiss me, my little one's two of them are like, ew. And the other ones are like, yay, do it more. But we teach them and we say, yeah, sex isn't gross. It's so good. It's such a beautiful thing. And then with teenagers, obviously a totally different conversation around it, but very much so of like, yeah, we have a great intimate connection because of this great gift God gave us. So figuring out how to celebrate it rather than demonize it or silence it or shame it is huge.
Absolutely. Girl, I don't want this conversation to end, but I know you've got commitments with your children and I want to honor that. So any closing thoughts before we have to go? Anything that you want to bring up that maybe I skipped over that we were going to talk about, or any advice you want to leave?
I think dig into the research. And again, I know like even as a mom, you're listening to this podcast while washing dishes or driving to pick up your kids or whatever. So you're like, I can't keep track of it all. I can't do it all. Like, that's why we exist at Moral Revolution. We have hundreds and hundreds of free blogs, free podcasts. We do have courses like parenting sexuality, like let's talk about it. We have books. You can come to my personal Instagram. I have the swipe ups for all of the kids' books. Like, we'll make it easy for you, but just make sure you don't put it off. Like, what's going to happen to your kids today or tomorrow, it's not fear-based. It's just you want to prepare them. You want to be the first one, and God equipped you to do it. Like, you are the right person for the job. Your kids
girl.
need to know that you are the right person to talk to when they have questions. So just being able, it's like you can go in, you need to shake off your like nervousness beforehand, do whatever you got to do, and go in as a confident mama of like, this is what God says. And just, you don't have to be an expert, but you're their mom. So you're their expert.
Exactly.
And that's all they need to know. They trust you. They love you. God's going to restore anything that you might slip up and say wrong. He'll fix it for you. Just go in, do it. Don't wait. You can do this.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Caitlin. How can I pray for you and your family and your husband? Anything that you want us to pray for? I'd love to pray for you to end out today.
Yeah, you just pray a covering for my kids, especially knowing that their friends are already exposed and having conversations. They know what we do, but it's just so good to, keep praying covering over them.
Oh gosh, yes. I love that. Let's pray together. God, I thank you so much for this mama. I thank you for her passion. I thank you for her family, for her marriage, for her mission. Lord, I just pray a covering over her children and her family, God, over all of our children listening to this right now that have set in our hearts a new way, that want to give our children your way rather than what the world is throwing at them. God, we pray for a covering and protection, not just to keep them safe, God, but to live a life glorifying to you, that they can speak out to their friends, to their family, to people that might not otherwise know, and they can actually be the one that's a conduit of Christ and your light and just the pure way, the way that is of your law and covenant and holy that you designed, that is so beautiful, that if we only knew, if we only operated in that, we would really understand what you were trying to give us. And so, God, I just pray against all the different things that would try to pervert the truth and the innocence and the reality of what your word is. And I just pray for our culture and this nation, God, that we would turn our hearts back to you. I thank you for what Caitlin's done to be able to get this resource into the schools. And I just pray that we could do that for our own families right now. And thank you for just giving us your Holy Spirit to guide us and direct us and equip us, Lord. I pray that right now for the sensitivity of her children and our children, that their hearts be pricked whenever there's something not right, and they'd have the confidence and to know they can come to mom and dad, they can have these conversations and they can pray to you about it. Lord, help us to be the example that you want us to be for our children. God, I pray blessings on this mama. Thank you for her boldness. Thank you for her being able to step out and talk in big ways about things that are just not talked about, that are so needed though. And so I pray that you would just give her a mouthpiece, God, give her the platform and the ability, whatever collaborations or workings they have going on with Moral Revolution. I just pray that you would be present in that, God. I pray that you would just divinely appoint the relationships that make this megaphone even louder, Lord. And I just pray that we would share that with the world and that it would be changed for you and your glory. God, thank you for this time. And I just pray protection over them until we meet again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Good News Mama. If you did, please leave me a review on iTunes. A 5-star review is best. And hit subscribe. Share with your friends on Instagram and Facebook. Please email me at lynn@goodnewsmama.com. You know I love questions. I love feedback. I want to know what you want to know. We're going to talk about what means something to you. So let's hear it. Follow me on Instagram at Good News Mamas. That's mamas with an S. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Keep your head up, keep your heart humble, and share that good news.